Well, all right. Hey. Hi, George. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Good. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
You
Let's
ready to
do
talk
it.
about your book?
Yeah.
All right. So let me say hi to everybody. Hi, you guys. I know it's been such a long time. I don't think I've been live in like forever, waiting on that trial to start for George Wagner the fourth. They pushed it back again. It's supposed to start Monday. Now they're going to have it start this coming Monday. Apparently, one of the special prosecutors is ill. Fine, I suppose. I mean, there's two of them. I don't understand, but whatever. It is what it is. So that'll be Monday, starting at hopefully 9 o'clock in the morning. We'll see. But today and tonight, we're here to talk to friend to the channel, George Jared, who's got a new book out called it's just Silent Silhouette, and it is about one of the cases that was featured in Netflix's documentary, The Confession Killer, about Henry Lee Lucas. And I'll let George take it from there. George?
Sure. So probably what I'll do is maybe back up just a hair and talk about another case briefly that kind of led us to this case.
Absolutely. However you want to do it.
And we actually included a chapter about that case in there too. And once I explain it, it'll make a lot of sense.
Okay.
The reason I'm talking about this case first. So in 2004, I started writing about a case, a girl named Rebecca Gould who got murdered in Melbourne, Arkansas. She was a 22-year-old college student. She had vanished from she had vanished from the house of a friend. She went to college up in Northwest Arkansas, but she had come home for the weekend and she stayed with a guy that she sort of dated off and on. She was 22 and
Yeah.
so it was like Monday morning. So she was getting all of her stuff ready to go back to college and she took him to work. Now he lived in a trailer house that was out in the middle of nowhere. It was like very rural, very remote place. Well, something happened to her. She vanished that morning. And when the police finally were able to get in the house the next day, which I need to add this in, the sort of boyfriend worked all day. He didn't go home that night. He went out with some friends, which they said was odd that he went out with them, but he did. He went out with them and he ended up staying the night at his friend's house. And he claimed that he never returned home to get any clothes or change or anything like that. And so the next morning, he says he told me when I interviewed him that he went straight back to work, which he didn't. He did go back to his house that morning to get a change of clothes. And what was interesting about that is that she was murdered in the house. There was no doubt about it. I mean, the bed was covered in blood. The mattress had been flipped. There were bloody pillows underneath the mattress. The bedding was all
Yeah.
bloody in the washing machine.
Oh, wow.
And her Pomeranian dog was in the house unharmed. Her car was there. Her cell phone was there. Her money was there. Her keys were there. Her clothing was there, but her suitcase was missing. And a piano leg on a piano in his living room that would come loose was also missing. And so they vetted his alibi. They pretty well ascertained that he probably was at work when this whole thing went down. And so they found her body a week later on September 27th, 2004. And she was on the side of the road. I was out there the day they found her. Saw her. She was very, very badly decomposed when I was out there. And so I actually ended up having to go back to the sheriff's department. I actually told her dad, a man named Dr. Larry Gould, that they had found his daughter. And so it was shocking for me. It was the first murder case I ever covered. And I actually was out there when they found the victim. So that was kind of a weird thing.
Oh, wow.
And so I wrote about it for years. They had a list of suspects. They would grill them. There was never any movement on the case at all. And because the detective who had the case for about 14 years, he had this false theory that somehow drugs were involved in this case. And it's kind of one of those things, like he was a former narcotics officer who is now a detective. And I'm not saying that the guy was necessarily a bad detective, but he had tunnel vision on two suspects in the case who absolutely had no reason to be suspects in this case. There was no evidence that tied them to the crime. He just knew they were druggies and they sort of knew her, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
It
Okay.
was one of those deals.
Like a
And
loose connection, but they had a bad past.
yes,
Gotcha,
exactly.
gotcha.
So in my first book, Witches in West Memphis, which was about the West Memphis Three that we talked about previously,
Mm-hmm.
I included a chapter about her case, and this was in 2016 because I wanted to just, I wanted to try to reignite, the investigation into the case.
Right.
Because
Spark some interest. You never know what people know. Some people don't realize that they're witnesses. You know what I'm saying? That they saw something because it wasn't anything to them, but it is the key. And that's usually what happens, especially in cold cases. So,
yes,
yeah.
absolutely. So I wrote about it in that book. Then I wrote a second book in 2017, which was an anthology style book. And it was just like every chapter was about a different murder case that I had covered, I covered capital murder trials and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it had about 5 or 6 murder cases in it. And I included an update chapter on hers because I had reconnected with her father.
Oh, okay.
And so we reconnected. Well, then I got an email from Catherine Townsend. She was a reporter for the Discovery Channel's website.
Oh, okay.
And she wanted to do a podcast called Hell and Gone. And it was going to be an 8 or 9 part series. And she was going to be based on Rebecca's case.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so she did the podcast and it just exploded. Like it made national news. Dr. Oz did a featured segment. He did, well, not featured, he did a whole hour segment on her case. The podcast became super popular. I couldn't believe it. And I think I did about 5 or 6 episodes. I can't remember exactly what it was. But I was kind of like, since I knew everybody, I knew all the players, I knew everything from ground zero, day one, however you want to say it. And so it really put a lot of pressure on the state police. And this detective who had the case, he was under a lot of pressure, and the pressure just kept mounting. One person who listened to that case was a former Army counterintelligence agent, and her name was Jennifer Buchholz. And she, her job in the military was, she basically would interview people to see if they were terrorists or not, in Afghanistan, Iraq. And so that's her deal. And she was teaching criminology and I think maybe forensics at American Military University. And she contacted me. And her resume, I could go on and on about it. She goes all over the world training police officers how to do their jobs. I mean, she does all sorts of really insane stuff. And so she really got interested in Rebecca's case. And she had never been to Arkansas. She lived in Colorado. She's originally from California. And so her and her husband actually, we just met. She emailed me and said, "Hey, can I talk to you about this?" And so she called me. We were on the phone for about 3 hours. I gave her the whole lowdown on the case.
Okay.
So she came to Arkansas with her husband. She dragged him down here. Great guy. Yeah, great guy. They actually came and stayed at my house. We're really good friends now, obviously.
Yeah.
And so she spent a week of her vacation time, like tracing the route, like the killer would have had to have taken from this rural trailer to the spot where the body was found. And she was doing all this analysis. And I took her to meet Dr. Larry Gould, the girl's father, and he gave her the autopsy report, and she had it analyzed. And she came to some pretty striking conclusions. The coroner had said that the girl had been struck in the head once, and that's what killed her.
Right. Okay.
Jennifer came to the conclusion that the girl had been struck twice. And she also noticed something. Now, Rebecca was badly decomposed. And so the coroner or medical examiner had that her hyoid bone was misplaced. And Jennifer said, no, it's not misplaced. They thought it was due to deterioration, but she'd only been out there for a week. Jennifer said, no, it was broken. And so that's usually an indication of manual strangulation.
Right. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so she starts writing stories for American Military University. They have a website, and maybe they have a magazine too. But she did like an 8-part series on it. Just brilliant, really good analysis. She brought in experts to talk about different aspects of the case. At one point, we even had the Vidocq Society. They were going to actually analyze this case. But then a female, it's just crazy. This sounds crazy. And one of these days, if you guys really want to get into this part of it, I will.
We will definitely one of these days get into that.
Yeah.
I like the crazy stuff. I do.
Oh, trust me, this one, you can't match this crazy. So a female, and I won't even mention who it was. I won't mention her
Okay.
name, but a
Okay.
female relative of Rebecca, the murder victim, she
Okay.
actually called the Vidoc Society and asked them not to study her sister's case. And yeah,
Okay.
she did. And it got to a point, and again, I do explain to people, this person had absolutely nothing to do with the murder, because that's the first thing that pops in people's heads, like, well, who's she covering up for? Or was she involved? I'm like, no, I don't know what her deal is. But anyway, she hates anybody who tries to dig into her sister's case, and it's she doesn't get along with her dad. You know, there was a contentious divorce, and so they're split apart. And which I did think it was funny, though, she still allowed him to walk her down the aisle when she got married a few years ago and pay for the wedding. But anyway, yeah.
Sometimes it's like that.
Yeah,
Family's complicated.
Yeah, and I've talked to him about it. You know, he doesn't know what to do. He has 6 daughters altogether, and she's one of them.
Heart. There's
And
no way.
He doesn't even know what to do. He tries to get along with her, but anyway. So we decided at one point to start a Facebook page.
Okay.
Just about her case. And so we start the Unsolved Murder of Rebecca Gould page. One of the first people to join our page was a guy named William Billy, quote unquote, Miller. He lived in the Philippines, owned a plantation there. He was an American.
Right.
And he was just really interested in the case. You know, he would like send us, he would comment on posts on the page, and he would, he messaged me a couple times privately, but it wasn't much of anything. It was just kind of like, it was almost like fishing in a way, like how people fish on someone.
Mm-hmm, yeah. See what you know.
Yeah, just to kind of lay it out. And so he honed in on Jennifer, and he would message her continuously with theories about the case and all this other stuff. Wow. Well, from the very beginning, someone we had a crowdsourcing team that was a part of this page.
Okay.
And it was funny enough, a stay-at-home mom living in Lubbock, Texas.
That's how it is.
And she is really good at genealogy. Like she figures these things out. I mean, I don't know how she has the time or the brain power, but she does it. She just spends hours and hours and hours digging through this stuff. Well, she figured out that he was first cousins with Casey McCullough, the sort of boyfriend who she took to work that morning.
Gotcha. Okay.
So we knew, from 2019, November of 2019, he was one of the first people to join our page. So he was kind of on our radar. I mean, he was related to Casey, and at that time we're thinking, okay, he's trying to get information for the family, because it was pretty obvious, even to the detectives, that the person removed the body from the house. And I told Dennis Simons, the original investigator, one time, he came into a book signing of mine. And I said, Dennis, I don't understand one part of this if you think this is a drug deal gone wrong. Number one, she had a minuscule amount of marijuana in her system. She's a college student. I mean, come on.
Right. Yeah, it's just weed.
It's just weed. Yeah, give me a break. So that's not it. There's no meth in her system. There was no alcohol. And they'd been reportedly had been a party, that weekend, but she didn't have any alcohol in her system at all. And here's the thing. The 2 people that he thought did it had no connection to the house. And so I said, explain something to me. Why did they move the body, put the body in a vehicle when anybody could have found? I mean, you put a body in your vehicle,
that's a risk.
You're putting yourself in the absolute, the most egregious danger you can possibly do to yourself.
Right.
I said, and they hid evidence. They tried to clean up the scene. Why would they do any of that? Why wouldn't they just take a match and torch the place with the body inside, and all the evidence goes up in flames?
Right. Why would you ever put putting a body in a vehicle is a desperate move. It's not only, but most likely somebody connected to both the person and the home.
Yes.
Because otherwise, what would be the point?
Exactly. And so we honed in on this sort of boyfriend, and he lied about a bunch of stuff. He lied about things he didn't have to lie about. And that was very suspicious to us. He was lying. He lied to me about going back to the house that day. And I was like, okay. Before all this happened in 2016, when my first book came out, I actually, Dr. Gould really wanted us to look at him because he thought he might know something. Mm-hmm. And I said, Dr. Gould, I said, he has a solid alibi from what the police tell me.
Right.
Well, I decided in the summer of 2016, I'd kind of dig into that solid alibi and just to see what it looked like. Mm-hmm. And so this is really funny. So this is where she's murdered is next to a little tiny town called Guyan. Well, just a few miles up the road is a smaller town. It's about 2,000 people. It's a little bit bigger than that town. It's called Melbourne. And
Okay. Is this
so
like northern Arkansas?
yes, like north
Okay.
central.
Okay. Okay.
And so he worked at the Sonic. That's where Rebecca dropped him off that morning.
Okay. Okay.
And so in 2016, this is 12 years later, I know he doesn't work there anymore, but I thought,
Right.
I'm just going to take a shot. I'll just call and see if anybody there might know him. It's a small town. Maybe somebody knows something.
Right. Right.
So I call up there and Car Hop answers and she's like, can I help you? And I said, yeah, this is going to sound crazy, but I'm looking for a guy named Casey McCullough. I know he doesn't work there anymore, but he used to, and I need to speak with him. Just want to, talk to him about the Rebecca Gould murder case because everybody in that town knew about it.
Right. Right.
And she goes, no, he's not here. I don't have his phone number. She said, but his wife is over here eating. Would you want to talk to her?
Oh, wow.
I was like, yeah. So
of course I would like to talk to her.
So they bring her over or brought her to the phone. I explained what I said, I'm just covering my bases. I'm a journalist. I'm not saying that there's anything to Casey. I just want to talk to him again. And he readily talked to me in the past. So I didn't think it'd be a problem.
Right.
And she said, great. She gave me his cell phone number. She gave me her cell phone number. She told me to friend him on Facebook because they still lived in that trailer.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, they lived.
Damn, she gave you everything. His phone, his cell phone number, his Facebook, and told you to send a friend request. That's such a girl thing.
Yeah. And I was on the phone with her for 10 minutes, and she said she'd read my book, and because the preface of the book was about Rebecca's case, and I even said in there, I don't really think there's any way, that Casey probably had anything to do with it because the police were so sure about his alibi.
Right. Right.
Well, I text him, call him, no response. I friend him on Facebook. I sent him a Facebook message and said, hey, I understand you don't have a signal all the time at your house. He never responded to any of it. So finally, after several days of not getting a hold of him at all, I contacted his wife and she said, don't ever contact us again. We don't want to talk to you. Just leave us alone. And that was it. She hung up on me. And I was like,
wow.
And I'll say this.
That's weird.
Yeah, and I will say this, and I've had communications with her since then, and she's always been very courteous to me and very respectful. I will say that. Now, to this day, I can show you on my phone right now, I've sent him 4 or 5 messages on Facebook that go all the way back to 2016. He's never even bothered to read them. So,
wow.
So we were getting pretty suspicious of something connected to this family.
Okay.
Well, in January of 2020, a new detective is assigned to the case.
Okay.
A guy named Special Agent Mike McNeil. Mike is a great detective. I will give him that. He very much is. And so he decides to take a new tact in the case. He decides, okay, I'm going to go look in the investigative file and I'm going to figure out who was closest to Rebecca around the time she died. Well, obviously Casey was. So he brought him in. And then they brought in some of the other McCullough. He had brothers and a dad and people who all lived in this area, grandpa. So he starts bringing them all in. Well, when he's in the case file, he notices something very interesting. The night before the murder, William Miller, who didn't live in Arkansas, he lived in Aransas Pass, Texas, actually came to town that Sunday night. And he had come to town because his mom and brother were moving back to Texas, and he came up to help them.
Oh, wow.
And he worked on oil rigs all over the world. The guy's a world traveler, been all over the world. And so he had a week off, so he decided to come help his mom and brother. Well, he stops by Casey's house for 15 minutes.
Wait, where did you say he's from in Texas?
Aransas Pass.
Oh, okay. Okay, because I was thinking of Port Aransas, but it's got to be somewhere
Port
by
Aransas is right. And Port Aransas is like, there's like a little island inlet, and it's across on the island inlet. I actually have an aunt that lived there for a long time.
I went there one time when I was a kid, and for summer vacation, my parents took us. Yeah. It's a cool little town, but that's neither here nor there. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. So he comes up and helps them move, but he goes by Casey's house for about 15 minutes.
Okay.
And Rebecca says, hey, somebody just pulled in. And so Casey goes out and talks to him, and according to the detective, both of their accounts of this incident are very similar.
Okay.
They're both outside. Rebecca's really not out there. We don't know if he saw her or what was going on that front, but he never met her, according to him. William Miller said, never met Rebecca Gould. So Mike, will fast forward to November, pandemic hits. He really goes after the McCulloughs hard.
Okay.
And I was at a suppression hearing last week or 2 weeks ago. And he was really grilling these dudes. And I knew they were because I know people that are connected to them. And I was getting information that this was happening.
Okay.
And so finally, William is obviously living out of the country. He has that plantation in the Philippines and he works on oil rigs. I mean, this dude has been to probably 60 countries, and I'm not exaggerating.
Oh, wow. So,
he's been to every continent except for Antarctica that I can find.
Oh, wow.
And he made a lot of money. He made like $25,000 a month just working on the tax-free, working on these oil rigs.
Oh my gosh.
And he had this huge plantation that actually made money in the Philippines, growing coconuts, and they had goats and all sorts of stuff. And he had a new wife there. He had a wife in the United States before, had some kids with her. They get divorced, and then he moved over there and has a new wife, new kids, and all that kind of thing.
Okay.
Well, Mike McNeil, the detective, figures out that he's coming into back to the United States to visit his mom and brother in the fall of 2020.
Okay.
And so he contacts the mom and the brother and says, hey, I want to talk to you guys. And if Billy's in town, I want to talk to him too. And it's just a cursory interview, because what happened back in 2004 is this. Billy and his, he comes and visits Casey for 15 minutes. The next day, him and his mom, they get some U-Hauls and they're loading up all their stuff to move to Texas. Well, then they go and grab his brother, who his brother was in high school at the time. They go and grab him out of school, and some of the people who worked at the school thought it was really odd that they just came and grabbed this kid out and said, he's never coming back, we're leaving, goodbye. So within 48 hours of this woman vanishing that Monday,
oh wow,
they're all in Aransas Port.
Right.
They're back in Texas. And the police did go and interview them on the Friday of that week, a couple days before her body was found. And so, but there was no, it's suspicious, but there's no real super red flag.
Right.
Well, Mike McNeil, the detective, he goes to Oregon. He tricks Billy in an interview on November 7th, 2020. And I only say that because that's my birthday, actually.
Oh, well.
Yeah. And he tricks
everybody coming in. Go ahead. Keep going.
He tricks him. And actually, I grew up in Oregon, too, which is kind of ironic. About an hour from where from where this happened. And so he tricks him into taking a polygraph, and then he tells him he failed it. And this is all videoed. We saw this.
Yeah. They're allowed to do it. They're allowed to lie.
And then he does, and I hate to use the term, but it starts with a B and it rhymes with Alsey. And he brings a picture of William Miller's truck from that time. He had the Texas Rangers track this truck down and take pictures of it in southern Texas.
Holy guac! Yeah, the Rangers don't play.
Yeah, and they got the pictures of the inside of the truck, and then there was a bloody rag at the crime scene.
Okay.
That was under the bed, and so he had a picture of that, and he goes, I know the killer's DNA is on this rag. We know that for a fact. And we have a problem. And William's like, what's the problem? And he goes, Rebecca's DNA was found next to the pedal on your truck.
Oh, dear.
Explain it. And when he does, he breaks down and he confesses that he did do it. That he said he gave no motive for it. He said he showed up after Casey was taken to work and he knocked on the door, said, hi, I'm Casey's cousin. I need to use the phone. Came inside, and he said a psychotic rage just overcame him. And he grabbed the piano leg and he hit this girl in the head twice. And then it broke. It shattered. And then he said he grabbed a necktie out of the closet.
Oh, my God.
And he strangled this woman to death.
For just had a snap moment. Wow. I mean, I suppose it's possible, but.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't sound very likely.
No.
So, but what was interesting about it is, remember back when I told you that Jennifer, my investigative partner, had said that the medical examiner was incorrect, that she had been struck twice in the head and that she'd been manually strangled. Well, guess what? A necktie The reason manual strangulation leads to the hyoid bone being broken is because of surface coverage, because you
Right.
cover enough surface. If you use like a ligature, like a shoelace or whatever else somebody would use, a zip tie, it doesn't cover as much surface area. So there's a possibility you'll just miss the bone just, from not the angle of how you're trying to choke the person.
Right.
So he knew things about the crime that no one could possibly know. He also led them, we don't know this for a fact. They haven't said it yet, but we know it. That he told them where he dumped her suitcase because there was items inside the suitcase that would tie him to the crime.
I see.
So the reason I told you all about that murder, and the murder trial is going to start on Halloween Day in a couple of
year.
This year.
Do you know if it's going to be televised?
It won't. More than likely won't. Yeah.
Oh, I could cover that. Darn it. Okay. Well, that's all right. I'll report on it. Send me updates. That's what you should do, is send me updates. Are you going to be there?
I'm going to try to be there every day.
So the suppression hearing, what they're trying to keep his confession out?
Yeah. And yeah. And I mean, the thing of it was, like, I've written about false confessions before.
Well, yeah.
And I was sitting with Dr. Gould when this was all going on, and he asked me after they played the meat of it, the best part of it, where he really gives the details. He said, "So what do you think?" I said, "Dr. Gould, that's a genuine confession. He's lying about things." I think that he's protecting at least one family member, at least.
Yeah. Because
the problem was he said he drove all the way through town in this low riding truck with her body in the back in broad daylight, which is a lie. There's a gravel road, an ancient gravel road that's very rarely used. That's about a mile from Casey's trailer that leads right to the spot where she was found, at the bottom of an embankment. I guess if I had a visual, it'd be easier. Like, here's his trailer, here's the gravel road. It meanders about 8 miles to about right here. There's a major highway here. Her body was found on the side of the road. He said he went this way, which goes all the way through this winding, looping town where every business is on the thoroughfare. Now, and maybe he was dumb enough to just wrap her body up in a sheet and throw her in the back of his truck and drive her that way, but I don't believe it.
No, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and then in his confession, he talked about something that was really bothered him was the constant coverage. That Facebook group. He just kept mentioning it over and over again. And then he was mentioning Jennifer, but I'm being honest about this, and I told her this. I said, I don't think he knows how to pronounce her last name, so he just wouldn't actually say her name.
That's
yeah,
funny.
I just have a feeling. And then Catherine Townsend, the investigative reporter who did the Helen Gone podcast, he mentioned her. But then he mentioned me by full name.
Oh, your whole government name, huh?
He called me Author George Jared, which is on my Facebook page.
Holy moly. He called you by your whole Facebook government name.
Yeah. And he said, he was telling the Oregon State Police assisted the Arkansas detective with this. And he told one of them, he's like, this guy's been writing these books and blah, blah, blah. He's a joke and blah, 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 and all this other stuff. And it was in his head. And I thought it was funny that it was in his head, because I don't think, like, there was a group of people there that this relative I was talking about earlier that's been trying to stop people from looking into the case.
Right.
This relative was there, and she kind of smirked when he was talking all this smack about me. And I was like, do you not understand that's exactly what we're trying to do?
Right. Exactly.
That's
like, what?
You're not getting it. He didn't say you or any of these other people, the people who were getting to him that were causing all this psychological pressure on him. Those were the people that he mentioned.
Right.
And so now I'm getting to the part where we wrote this book about Deborah Sue Williamson. So in 2021, we were asked to go and speak at CrimeCon in Austin, Texas, and give a presentation about Rebecca's case, and specifically William Miller communicating with us. What he didn't know is that we were sending all those communications to the detective who was working the case.
Wow.
And so we went and gave the presentation. We got done, and we suddenly realized that we had developed some skills and tools that actually worked really well in reference to her case. We thought, should we try this again with an unsolved case? And so a friend of ours, actually, I'll say this, the one who did the genealogy on the Rebecca case, she mentioned a case out of Lubbock, Texas, the unsolved murder of Deborah Sue Williamson. She was stabbed to death on August 24th, 1975 in her carport of her house. She was 18 years old. She had just gotten married 10 weeks before. Her husband, Doug, was at work when this happened.
Right.
It was a Sunday night, and he worked at a Pizza Inn as a manager. And so what the story was is that she was at that Pizza Inn that night. It was a Sunday with her mom, stepdad, and half sister. They were eating.
Yes.
Okay, so you saw that on the confession.
Yes, and the sister was her little sister was supposed to spend the night, and then for some reason at the very last minute, her mom said, "No, you're coming home with me."
Right.
Or she would have been there, and she feels guilty about it. I remember that from her interview.
Yes, and I think that's a little over dramatized because I think what actually happened, we looked it up, school was starting around then, and so it's a Sunday night, and you can't stay the night with your sister.
Yeah. Right. That makes more sense than for some unknown mother's intuition. That makes more sense. Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, so Debbie was supposed to return that night and put $140 in the cash register because her husband, Doug, had borrowed the money to buy a CB radio. And he could do that. It wasn't one of these things that it was uncommon. The manager of the Pizza Inn could borrow money back in those days, but it just had to be rectified by their next pay period, if that makes sense.
Gotcha.
And so she was supposed to return and help him do inventory and do all this other stuff. Now, at the Pizza Inn that night, a couple of other people were a guy named Lex, who was a friend of Doug's, another guy, they're in their like early 20s, 19, 20, that age range.
Okay.
He was supposed to come up and help him do the inventory. He would come up and do work at the Pizza Inn, but he didn't actually work there. He wasn't an employee.
Okay.
But Doug would feed him like pizza and stuff like that.
All right.
He was just a friend who would help. And then there was another friend who had just arrived back in town 2 weeks before this, a guy named Paul. Mm-hmm. And Paul was a cook who worked at the Pizza Inn. And interestingly enough, Paul had actually dated Debbie before Doug did.
Okay.
And so the night of the murder, Paul asked Doug, who's now his boss, he said, "Hey, I'm going on a date tonight. Is it possible I could get off early?" And Doug says, "Sure." Yeah. And he was going to go on a date with a woman named Tina.
Okay.
And so he leaves early, goes on his date with Tina. And then around 10 o'clock, there's only two people in the Pizza Inn. It's Doug and Marianne, this waitress. And so he's getting worried. She was supposed to be back.
Right.
And so she hadn't returned. Now, I want to mention this. I'll mention this at this point. Okay. Paul made an unusual request whenever he asked to get off work. And again, I'm not saying this makes him incriminates him in this case in any way, shape, or form.
Right. It's just interesting. It's an interesting detail.
It's an interesting detail. He asked Doug if he could swing by his house and take a shower there because it's closer to where his date was, like her house.
Okay.
And it's interesting because Doug and Debbie, when they got married, his parents actually gave him the house that he grew up in as like a wedding present because they lived in a different house.
Oh, wow.
And so he and Paul had been friends for many years. And so Paul had actually stayed the night there just as a buddy,
right.
And whatnot. So he knew the house. I mean, there was no doubt about it. And so he asked to take a shower. Well, Doug calls Debbie and says, "Hey, Paul's going to come by and take a shower." Debbie says, "Well, I'm about to leave. I'm going to leave here in a few minutes." She was watching a movie, and we believe she was watching the movie The Odd Couple with Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon.
Oh, that's a good movie.
It is. I actually went and saw the female version of a female version of it a couple of weeks ago, and it was actually really awesome.
Oh, wow.
So he asked, Doug hangs up the phone, and Paul says, "Well, if she's there by herself, I'm not going to go by there." Okay. So I just want to make sure that detail's in there. So Doug keeps calling. He calls her parents. He calls other people. Now, I'll remind people it's 1920.
Hold on. I got a question.
Sure.
So he asked, okay, this is the part that's confusing to me about his behavior because he asked his manager if he could get off early. They were friends, right? He asked him if he can get off early because he has a date. and he wants to, and then he says, "Hey, by the way, can I go and take a shower at your house?" And he's given permission to, but then suddenly he changes his mind because she's there. But who did he think would be there with her? How would she, what others, under what scenario would she not be there by herself? Do you know what I'm saying? That's the part that's not clicking for me.
Okay, could you back up and ask that question again? Because you actually blinked out on me for a second. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Okay, so the friend and coworker asks the manager if he can get off early, and the manager says yes. And he says, "And hey, by the way, can I swing by your house to take a shower before my date?" And his friend says yes. And then suddenly he changes his mind because Debbie's going to be there by herself. But my question is, the husband is there at work. That's his coworker. That's his manager. Who else would have been there with Debbie to begin with? Do you see what I'm saying? Under what circumstance would Debbie not have been alone in that house for him to change his mind?
I can answer that. It's
Okay.
possible, and we don't know, but we can speculate, and with probable cause.
Okay.
So Debbie was often known to go to her parents' house and hang out with them a lot.
I see. So
And she had been with them just an hour before at the Pizza Inn. So maybe they don't go back to her house. Maybe they go back to their house over in a place called Buffalo Lake. So that's possible.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes that okay. Now it's clicking for me, because otherwise, you see where I was going with that. It didn't kind of make sense, you know.
Or the little sister could have stayed the night. And
that's true.
So that could have been a factor too.
Okay.
So anyway, Doug, finally they closed down around midnight. Doug could not have left that night. He couldn't even leave to make a deposit because they were so slammed.
Oh, wow.
And so he decides he's going to go home and see what's going on with Debbie.
Right.
And so he drives. It's only a 4-minute drive from the Pizza Inn, 4 to 5 minute drive to his house. He gets there. The back door's open. It's really dark. And he is walking towards the back step, and he stumbles upon something, and it's Debbie. She'd been stabbed 17 times. Her shirt had been pulled up, and her pants had been pulled down to make it look like she was sexually assaulted, but she wasn't.
Okay.
Her purse with the $140 in it was missing. Now, we think there was kind of a red herring when the purse was taken. She had a proof book of her wedding photos. It may be significant. I'm not saying it's not, but we feel like the original investigators kind of honed in on it a little too much.
Okay.
But it's like one of those little books, you know, that when you get married, you have like different pictures and people can look at them. And back in those days, people would say, "Oh yeah, I'll order that picture." And yeah, it's because in the media, it was portrayed that their wedding album had been taken, which was not true.
Right.
A small proof book that probably fit right in her purse.
Gotcha.
And so the killer had knocked out the kitchen window with a garden hoe, and they left the back door open, which it was ludicrous to me because they knock out this little tiny window that I couldn't even crawl through to this day. And I'm not a gigantic guy by any means.
Right.
There was a sliding glass door right next to it that if you shattered it, you could just walk through. And here's the other small detail is the back door is just wide open. So why are you breaking a window it would be really hard to climb through that if you had it there. So the person who did it, they were just fumbling around trying to, create misdirection as to what crime was, what the motive for the crime was.
Right. That's interesting.
The original investigation, they focused on her brother, Ricky, again, because he was a druggie. He was into drugs, and they focused on him. He took multiple lie detector tests and passed them.
Okay.
Polygraphs, excuse me. And then he talked to the media. He's like, because there was an incident the year before that where her and him got in a fight, and he slapped her. And he goes, "We're siblings." He goes, "We're teenagers. We're siblings." He goes, "How many people have ever got slapped their sister or their brother, in that circumstance?" And of course, everybody's been there. It's happened. It happens.
Right. Yeah. Brothers and sisters fight.
Yes. So the case went cold.
Okay.
And then, as you know from watching The Confession Killer, our dear friend Henry Lee Lucas in 1984, 10 years after her murder, confesses to her murder.
Yes.
Now, her parents were like, no way, Jose, you did not kill our daughter.
I mean, from jump, like immediately, the minute they
Immediately.
heard his story and what he said happened, her
Mhm.
mother said, no, that's impossible.
Yes.
Because he had said he had come in one way, and she said there's no way he could have come in that way because there was a curio cabinet in front of that door. So
Yes.
nobody was coming in or coming out of that um, door at all. And there was something else that now I can't, there was another thing that she said, absolutely not. No, there was some other detail he gave that was wrong too.
Yeah, I think he said that she had been raped when she wasn't.
Yeah, something like that.
They did some chemical testing back then where they could determine, and the testing was pretty conclusive that she wasn't raped. It was definitely a stage type thing.
Right.
Oh, interestingly enough, um, she was stabbed about 25 feet away from the back step, and the killer dragged her back. And what's interesting about that is he actually dragged her back to a spot. Now it's really dark, period.
Right.
There's not much light, but he actually dragged her back to a spot where she was a little bit more lit than where she, like if he just left her where she fell,
Right.
where the stabbing began, it would have concealed her much better than her being on the back step. And of course, one of my first questions was when I looked at it, and Jennifer and I had a very lengthy conversation about it. If you're going to drag somebody away from that spot, why don't you just drag them in the house?
Yeah, that's why just stop there.
Yeah, doors open. I mean, just drag them in the house, and then you don't have to worry about any car driving by, any person walking by. There's no way, and we actually came to the stunning conclusion that we think that the killer subconsciously wanted Doug to find her, the husband. And
if she was moved, it's an interesting. I mean, that's an interesting theory given the fact that most people, the idea is to conceal the body. Not there's a certain brand of people that would put a body on display, even a little bit. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it does seem a little personal in that aspect, and it just so she was killed outside of her house.
Yes.
Like in the car. They didn't really explain that all that well in the documentary. And the thing, look, The Confession Killer, it's a good documentary. It is. But it flips back and forth between multiple cases at a time.
Yes.
And it's kind of a little bit hard to follow. And then there's this weird point where they just start out of nowhere. It's weird. Then they start bringing Ottis O'Toole into the picture, and they're talking. And then there's this weird, it's not weird. It's an awkward moment between Henry Lee Lucas and Ottis O'Toole, and Henry is crying. Ottis is comforting him, but it's very awkward. It's just awkward. And you're just sort of left like it's weird where they put it in the documentary is what I'm trying to say. And then they start talking about cases that he confessed to again. And it's a little disjointed, but it's still a good documentary.
Yes, it is. And so
Max said, couldn't she have moved and then collapsed on the steps?
We don't think so, just based on we've got pictures of we actually have the crime scene photos. And
right.
And actually, I guess I should explain that too here in a second. So we know we know the basic blood pattern. And I'll tell anybody this right now. If you're interested in this case or the Rebecca Gould case, we do have pages for both of them. And so if you want more information, like more detailed stuff, like the Rebecca Gould stuff, I gave you a very, very 30,000 foot, synopsis, but there's a lot to it. Just get on Facebook and join one of our pages, start there. And you'll find a ton of information on either one of these cases.
Okay.
But no, she was dragged. There were drag marks.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, there were drag marks, and she was clearly dragged. And so what happened is when her parents proved that Henry Lee Lucas didn't do anything to their daughter, the Lubbock PD kind of just gave up on the case. Like I think it was the district attorney. Well, maybe it was the district attorney. Somebody had the entire case file and just slid it across the table to her stepdad, a guy named Bob, and he goes, "Here, you figure it out." So from that point, the family had everything from that point.
And they did. This family, you guys, it's sad because they interview her mom, right? And you can just the tenacity that her mom has, and it, it's she doesn't have anything to lose or to gain by, you know, exonerating Henry Lee Lucas, right?
Mhm.
You know, most people, the police tell you that so and so committed the crime, and they confess, and people are apt to believe it. But this mother said there's no way, and she was so tenacious about wanting the right person caught that she wasn't just going to be, she just wasn't going to accept this foot. And it is this confession that he gave makes no sense. And she's right. I don't
Yeah.
even know why I don't know why anybody believed it, but you know, good for her,
They
good for her mom.
they actually tried to clear a couple of cases in Lubbock through him,
They did.
and it was just ridiculous. I mean, it was you can't even make up the foolishness that they were going through. And I will say this, in Debbie's case, there are two people in her family who were absolute advocates for her.
Hmm.
That was her stepfather, Bob, and that was her mother, Joyce.
Yes.
They advocated, and unfortunately, Joyce passed away right as as the confession killer came out. I don't know if she saw it or not, but it was very close to that time.
That's a
And
shame.
it was kind of a tragic death. I probably shouldn't get into it, but I mean, you can imagine that the
Yeah.
grief that you deal with all those years. And you got to realize, for years the police said her son was the murderer, and her son took his own life in 1990.
Oh,
So,
that's awful. That's
so
awful. Just tragedy upon tragedy.
yes. And so now fast forward to 2021, we're in Austin, Texas. We are approached about this case, and we're like, okay. So we sit down, we do some research, we talk to some family members, we get the case file, which is rare, you know, in a cold case.
Yes.
So we had it. I had it all laid out on my desk. Some things started popping out to us. Some things that should have popped out to the original investigators.
Okay.
And again, not pointing any fingers, but we definitely know where we'd start this. If the yellow brick road in this case was going to start somewhere, there was a couple of spots where we felt like there was a good place to start. So Jennifer and I, we're in late June now.
Okay.
And we're like, okay, so what are we going to do? Of course, I know Jennifer's gung ho. I mean, she wants to, she would be on she'd be in the first car ride to Lubbock, Texas from her house in Colorado, or on the first plane. She doesn't care. So she's like, well, we need to go there. Yeah. I mean, so she's like, we need to go there.
Okay.
I said, okay. And of course I told her, just so you know, I didn't grow up in Lubbock, Texas, but I was actually born there. And so I have family there.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I do have some family there. In fact, come to find out, when we went to Lubbock, we went to visit Debbie at the cemetery. And so we pull up. I'm like, well, just so you know, my grandparents are buried in the same cemetery.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. That's crazy.
I'll tell you what's even crazier, and it gets more crazy. She was born in Portland, Oregon, and died in Lubbock, Texas.
The opposite of you.
I was born in Lubbock, Texas, and I grew up just outside of Portland.
Wow.
And
but you still hung on to your twang.
I've lived in the South for a long time now. When I moved back to the South, and of course, this is funny. The girls, when I lived in Oregon, they all loved my accent there. So I guess I maybe subconsciously just decided to keep it because they liked it.
Most girls do like a twang.
They do. when I went, I've been to Europe before, and people think I'm British. You know, like
really.
Oh yeah, they'll always come to me and say, "So you're from Britain?" And I'm like, nope, just from the South.
Yeah, I don't have it. See, I don't have a twang, and I grew up in the South. I grew up in Texas. I grew up in Arlington, Texas, and I never hear a twang. But I when I go home to Arizona, my family.
Yeah, but Jen, I can tell you right now, hearing your voice, it doesn't surprise me one bit that you're from Texas, because you sound like somebody. I have a lot of family and friends in Texas, so you do sound like Texas is a little different than the rest of the South.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we like to refer to it as Texas, and it's, what is it, 49 bitches?
Yeah, something like that. Hey, I'm from Texas too, so
there you go. Yeah.
Hey, so anyway, we decided to go to Lubbock. Well, what we did in our lead up to going to Lubbock is we decided to start tracking people down.
Okay.
And one of the first people we tracked down was Doug, the widower.
Okay.
And I told Jen, I said, let me handle this one. He's from Lubbock, Texas. He's in his mid 60s. I mean, it's more my wheelhouse to talk to him.
Right, right.
So I contacted Doug and we hit it off. The first time I talked to him, we were probably on the phone for 2 hours. Super good dude. I noticed something, and he gave me the details he could remember. He said he was in so much shock from what happened that he couldn't remember a lot of the details vividly.
Right.
Like, honestly, his police report account, like the accounts in the police reports, were probably more accurate than he was going to be, which is not surprising because it has been 46 years.
Yeah, see, that's common. It's always when it's opposite. Like when they give a report initial statement and people, they don't remember, but then 40 years later, suddenly they have all these details. Then that always causes me a side eye because it should be the other way around.
Yes. And so, he didn't try to make anything up. And I asked him, of course, he was interviewed as a suspect. I mean, that, he's a husband. He's going to be the first one they're going to look at.
Right.
And I said, so did you get polygraphed? And he goes, yeah, I did.
Okay.
And I said, how did you do? And he goes, well, they told me I passed it. I said, passed the whole thing? He goes, well, no. He said, they said I did miss one question, like when they asked me if I killed her. But they told me that I would had to have missed a bunch of other questions for that to be a relevant result. And I said, okay. Well, I noticed his phone number was a Missouri number.
Okay.
And I was like, I said, Doug, so do you live in Missouri? And he, are you in Missouri? He goes, yeah. He goes, I live in a little town called Doniphan. It's about, and he goes, you've never heard of it. It's out in the middle of kind of nowhere. And I told him, I said, Doug, I live about an hour from you right now.
Oh, wow.
And he goes, are you serious? I said, yeah. And so
That's crazy.
George,
you just live everywhere.
I know, it's insane.
You're like that I've Been Everywhere Man song. That's you.
I know it. I mean, I'm telling you, of course, Jennifer, she all the time, she has a hard time grasping all these coincidences in these cases we look at.
Yeah.
Because it's all the time. I mean,
that's weird.
Rebecca's case the trial is going to start on Halloween Day. I'm going to be called as a witness in another murder trial in Dyersburg, Tennessee on Halloween Day because I interviewed the husband of a woman who got murdered. I interviewed him twice. And so I've already been told I'm going to be summoned as a witness in that case.
Oh my.
Yeah.
You're going to be busy, George.
It's weird. It really is. So I'm talking to Doug and I'm like, so what happened after the murder? What happened to you? And he said he was so grief stricken that he moved to Northeast Arkansas, which is where I live now.
Right.
And he went to a school called Arkansas State University and got a teaching degree. And then he lived in Southern Missouri and he was a teacher for like 30 something years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Did he remarry and all that?
He did. And he had kids and we got to meet his daughter and his now wife and very, very nice people. It was interesting talking to the daughter because that when her and her brother were growing up, they didn't really know that their dad had been married before and that his first wife had been murdered. They found some like press clippings or something that they'd kept. And so talking to her about that, she goes, it was really weird. One thing that we encountered with everybody that we tracked down in this case who knew Doug is everybody likes him. And he's just got a very, very, I don't want to say infectious personality, but he does. I mean, I've gone and ate dinner with him. Me and Jennifer went up there one night. When she was in town, we just drove up to Missouri and went and ate dinner with him one night.
You don't often hear Doug. I can't think of a single criminal, serious criminal that's been named Doug ever. So it kind of makes sense that he's a likable guy, which I know doesn't really mean anything, but I'm just thinking about it. Odd coincidences,
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what was weird. So we formed another page like we did with Rebecca.
Okay.
And immediately, almost right out the jump, we had a person contact us, and it was the waitress who worked with Doug that night.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And she told me, I said, can I talk to you on the phone? She said, yeah. And she's living in another state now. And so we start talking, and I'm like, so did he leave that night at all? And she goes, absolutely not. She said he could not have. She said there was only the two of us working once Paul left.
Mm-hmm.
And she said I would have to have cooked, ran the register, and tended to customers, waited on him. She goes, there's no way I could have done all that. And trust me, I would have noticed if he was gone.
Right, yeah.
And I asked her, I said, well, what kind of a boss was Doug? And she said he was the hardest working, best guy. He did he was kind. He worked hard. She said I only worked with him for like a month or so because of the tragedy. This whole thing
Right.
happened, and she was a college student at the time, and she said he didn't leave. So that's all I can tell you is that he didn't leave.
Which
And I
is
said,
important. That rules
yeah,
him out.
it rules him out in the sense that he couldn't have committed the crime. Now, technically, could he have orchestrated it? Maybe, possibly that.
Right.
But then we'd have to come up with a motive. And the problem is that he and Debbie had only been married for about 10 weeks.
Yeah. So what would be
And,
the motive at that
you
point?
know, and here's the thing, like they had life insurance policies on each other.
Right.
But he actually was relatively very well paid in the mid 1970s. Being a manager at a store like that was actually
Hmm.
a good job. And
Yeah, it was.
he was well paid, and they had a house. And everybody that we talked to, like we would talk to like people who hung out with them as couples, and they all said the same thing. They were like,
Yeah.
they were just peas in a pod. They just got along really well.
Now, before I forget, I'm going to have to, I don't want to interrupt. If I don't ask it, I'll forget. When Henry Lee Lucas confessed to this, did he say that Otis was with him? Because it's weird when they're talking in the confession killer, because like he'll say, well, if you like Henry would say, well, if you want to say you were there with me or whatever, and the prevailing thought was that Otis was just really under Henry Lee's thumb and just always wanted to please him and would just be agreeable to anything that he said. So I can't remember if this is one that he said he was there or not. The only reason I'm asking is because one of the girls that's in here, Decipher podcast, Tia, she has been looking at Jeffrey Dahmer, and she is not 100% convinced that Otis is the actual killer of Adam Walsh.
Adam Walsh.
She's
Yeah.
thinking that perhaps Dahmer.
Well, I'm not convinced at all that Otis Toole is the one who killed Adam Walsh. I'm not convinced of that at all. Not even
Yeah, neither am I. But I was just curious because, of course, they focused solely, for the most part, on Henry Lee and not that much on Otis O'Toole. So, excuse me. I just was, is he mentioned in the case file?
Otis, I believe, is mentioned briefly.
Okay.
Now, there is a part of the case file that does obviously talk about Henry Lee Lucas and his ridiculous story that he told them that they actually believed, which I still can't believe.
Right.
So Otis is mentioned, I think, a little bit, but not much. I think he did say that they were together, but it was just in the sense of they were always together. It wasn't
Right.
like he gave anything specific.
Okay.
So we talked to Doug. We talked to the waitress. Her name was Marianne. So then we decided to go to Lubbock, and we're going to track down everybody in the case.
Okay.
And so obviously, two people we want to talk to, Paul and Lex, they were there that night.
Right.
You know what
Okay.
I mean? And this is what I didn't tell you. So when Doug finds her body, he freaks out. He drives back to the Pizza Inn, and people are like, oh, why did he leave? I can't believe he left. And I'm sitting there going, because he just saw a murdered human. People don't know how people are going to react. If it was in your face, you don't know what you would do.
No, you don't know. People think I would do this, that, or the other. And no, you don't know what you would do. And you should be lucky that you don't know what you would do.
That's exactly right.
Because you don't.
So when he came back to the Pizza Inn, Paul had arrived back from his date with Tina, and Lex was there. So and he comes in and says, Debbie's been raped. We need to call the police. So he goes and calls the police.
Okay.
And he calls her parents. Well, then Lex and Paul jump into Lex's vehicle, and they drive over there, and Lex actually checks her for a pulse.
Okay.
He doesn't find one.
Okay.
Now, coincidentally enough, Lex was friends with Debbie before Doug and Debbie got married too. And they had gone to prom together like as friends. They weren't really dating. I think they'd gone to the movies once or twice together. So they did have, they were friends, and they had kind of dated a little bit. So he knew her, he knew her before he knew Doug.
Okay. Gotcha.
And so just so you guys are aware of that dynamic. So we go to Lubbock. We did kind of what we wanted to do is we wanted to saturate all of the local media as much as we could, because I'm a media person. I know how this works. I mean,
yeah.
And so we went to the TV station, one of the TV stations in town. They did a package on us coming to town and working on this case again. which
Okay.
we were very, very grateful for because they did a very fantastic job. And then actually a girl, the reporter there, Blair Sable, she's a top-notch reporter.
Okay.
And so we kind of did that. We wanted to focus on that, but we were going to be there. We intentionally planned on being there. We wanted to be at the house the night of the anniversary of the murder.
Okay. Okay.
And our plan is we wanted to be in the moment because we believe she was murdered between 9 and 9:30 because the TV, that movie would have went off the air at 9:30. But
Right.
actually, if you remember back in those days, it was like the Sunday movie of the night. They would always end the movie around 9:20, do a commercial break, and then talk about the movie that was going to be on next week.
Yes. And then the news.
And then the news. And that's exactly what happened. So we think she was walking out that door somewhere between 8:50, 9:20. And from the research and the experiments we were able to do in examining all the autopsy photos, examining all the crime scene, everything we've done, all the work we
Right.
did, we believe that she was probably, whoever came to her house that night, it's most likely that they confronted her, that
Okay.
they were face to face, and then something happened. She stuck her left hand out, and then the first stab comes, and it goes right into her, a right hand dominant person with a knife in their hand.
Okay.
Goes right in because there was only one stab wound to her body that was absolutely fatal, and it was that one. And it
Wow.
could have been the very first stab delivered.
Wow.
And so we go to the house that night. And here's what's funny. So the city of Lubbock has grown all the way out to where this house is. It was kind of rural back in the day. 5-lane road right in front of her house where it used to just be a lonely 2-lane road. The street lights everywhere, houses all around there. I could not believe how dark it was.
Yeah.
It was.
There are places in Texas it gets real dark. You know that.
Yeah. It was just unbelievable. And even Jennifer and I were sitting there talking. We had a group of people with us who wanted to come. And we were just talking. We're just like, this is so dark. Well, the homeowner, or the guy that lives in the house now, a guy named Juan, at first he was wondering why these people were out roaming around his periphery of his property at the middle of the night. And well, it was 9. It was dark. I mean, it was 9 o'clock. The sun.
You gotta be careful doing that in Texas, you know.
Yeah, he came out and told us later that he had a rifle ready to start popping us with.
Of course he did. That's Texas.
So I sent him a nice, arrangement, like with snacks in it. A couple of days later, I left it on his fence. He had a really pretty little puppy too. But he let us
nice of you to send an arrangement. I hope if I ever am living in a home that was once the site of a murder, that if somebody comes to investigate it, that they leave me a snack package.
I did, and it was really good too. He actually texted and said thank you.
Oh wow!
So we were able to do measurements. We were able to figure out like, okay, approximate heights, because being on scene is so. And here's the thing: all the original bricks. It was all the original stuff. The fixtures were like the frames in the windows were all the same. The door had been changed, but we could see where like the original panel in the door was. Okay. And the layout of the house was exactly the same. So we walked into the kitchen, walked out, and we were standing right where her body was found at that moment. And so we were able to get one thing that jumped out to us immediately. This wasn't some stranger who came to this house.
Right.
It had to be someone who knew the property, who knew the house. And it's possible that the person actually may have parked behind in the alley, because there was an alley over beyond the fence in the backyard. Okay. They did find one tire track back there. We don't know if it's relevant or not, but they did find it.
Okay.
So after we get done, dealing with the media stuff for a day or so, and then of course we went to the house several times and we were doing all that.
Right.
Then we decided to start tracking some folks down. And of course, Paul had dated Debbie. He worked there, asked off early. And so we tracked down Tina.
Okay.
Now, Tina lives out in the middle of nowhere, Texas. And I'm talking like nowhere.
Yeah, there are still some nowhere Texases.
Yes. She, her and her husband, they have this beautiful house, but you have to go down miles and miles, and it's trails. It's not even a gravel road. It's a trail for the
Yeah,
most
that's
part.
how it was. Where when we got our chocolate lab nester, we went to Beaumont. Yes,
Yeah.
and I mean, like the house that there was nothing for miles. It was
Yeah.
peaceful, but a little creepy. Horror movies kind of start out like that with a dirt road.
Well,
So,
yeah. Well, here's the thing. This was in the middle of the day. I was expecting John Wayne to come flying down off of one of these, these rock formations that were out there. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
it was one-eyed Susans as far as you could see.
Oh wow.
Tumbleweeds as big as my car.
Yeah, yeah.
Old jacks bobbing up and down, and then
Yep.
cattle coming across, and I'm honking at them, yelling at them to get out of the road.
Oh, they don't care.
Yeah, no, they don't care. It was interesting. We got to shit, and they had this beautiful. Their property is gorgeous. I mean, they have this wonderful, beautiful property. They have I think it's a man-made lake not too far from their house. That it was like a fissure in the ground that had been,
Oh
they
yeah.
made a dam on each side, and it was just a gorgeous place. We get there, and we get out of my car. Of course, I'm driving a convertible, which the dude, I could tell Tina's husband was looking at me like, how did you get that thing down here? And so we tell him, we're looking for Tina, and he says she's in there making lunch, and then he's playing with the dog out. They had like an artificial turf front yard.
Oh, okay.
And he's out there playing with his dog, and we go in there, and she looks at us and she goes, "You're here to talk about Deborah Sue Williamson, aren't you?" And we said, "Yeah."
Aww.
And she goes, "And you want to know how it went with Paul that night?" And we said, "Yeah." And she told her story.
Right.
And she said, he got there around 9:50 to 10 o'clock that night. She said that he was covered in water because he had, just taken a shower. And she said they drove around. They went to the McDonald's there in town, but they didn't go to the Pizza Inn, even though she wanted to go to the Pizza Inn because she worked there part-time.
Oh, okay.
That's how they met.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. And she just, she told us her story. And of course, what we did is we chronicled all that in our book,
Okay.
And so once we had her tracked down, we just started we had a spreadsheet of people we wanted to hit up. We tracked down a woman named Dorothy who went on a boating excursion with Debbie and Doug, Paul, and somebody else, or maybe a couple other people the day before the murder at the lake.
Okay.
And so we tracked all them down because we thought, okay, maybe something was said at the lake. Maybe this group of friends was all out there and something happened.
Right. Or like back in those days, people sort of minded their own business, and, but even if nothing was said, people pick up on tension. You know what I mean? So even something like that, even if it was just tense between the two of them, or they were short with one another, you know how it is when you're a couple.
Yeah.
There's a way to, like, I don't know. I'm sort of traditional, and I was raised not to fight in public with your husband. So, I would never like call my husband out in front of God and everybody publicly, but people who were close to me would know if I was irritated. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So maybe something like that. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. But nothing?
Actually, yeah, no, nothing that we were able to figure out at that time.
Okay.
Another person that we tracked down was also someone who was questioned by police. It was a woman who had dated Doug for a long time before he got with Debbie.
Okay.
And there was some tension back in those days between them. And you could tell she really cared about Doug.
Right.
That came through. I mean, but again, we all were teenagers at one time. We all dated people.
Yeah.
And then we split up, and one of us moved on to someone else, and the other person moved on to someone else, and sometimes one of them wasn't happy about it. I mean,
right. But sometimes, like, look at Stephanie Lazarus. You know who she is, right? The cop.
Yeah.
So she unalived her. What's weird about it is she almost doesn't really cop to dating him. If you listen to her interrogation, how she's like, oh yeah, blah, 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 but she's the one that, killed his wife and bit her.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're right to start where you were starting. That makes total sense.
Yeah. And she graciously welcomed us into her home. Had these two really pretty dogs. I loved them.
You're a dog lover, I can tell, because you're meant no heart. People don't. You can always tell another dog lover because they will mention the dog. Because I mean,
Yeah.
you're there obviously for a purpose, but you can't help it. Dogs are amazing.
Yeah, no, they really are. We completely agree on that. And it was so interesting when we went to her house. We went there, and her husband was there.
Uh-huh.
Super nice guy. And I know I keep saying that, but I've done work like this before, where
Right.
people weren't nice at all. Like they were very confrontational, and were not
Yeah.
helpful. And
People
so
in
that was.
Texas are typically friendly. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, Jennifer and I we were just stunned every time we go to somebody's house. They're like, they just welcomed us in, asked us if we want to eat lunch with them, and
yeah.
is there anything else? Well, we went to this woman's house who had dated Doug, and she wasn't there. And he told us, he said, sorry, she's not here. She's down. I think she was helping a friend do something somewhere else in town.
Yeah.
And we're like, dang, okay. And we left, cards and said, hey, could you maybe call us sometime? We are just outside talking because we'd both driven our separate cars up there.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, dude comes running out. He's like, could you guys wait like 15 minutes? She wants to talk to you.
Oh, wow. So you
like,
guys just got like super right place, right time. Oh, yeah. Wow. What a fortuitous adventure, that trip that you guys went on, really. Because
Yes.
I know that it doesn't happen like that often.
No, it doesn't. I mean, I can tell you that doesn't happen. So she goes in there, tells us her story. We were in there probably, I'd say close to an hour talking to her and her husband. Great people. And we come out of there. Now, I should mention at this point, we can't eliminate any possibility.
Right.
But there are more logical conclusions based on statistical probability that we can look at.
Right.
And one thing that we had learned, we actually brought a knife expert in, a guy that I know named Jeff Schaefer, and he looked at the wounds and he said, and he was pretty confident. He's like, that's a military style dagger issued from 1943 to 1946 in the U.S.
I need to talk to him. I would love for him to look at the autopsy pictures of Christopher, Michael, and Steve and finally rule out for once and for all whether a knife was used or not.
Yeah, Jeff is a wonderful resource.
That would be an excellent resource for that. As if I hear about that dadgum X mark one more time.
Yeah.
But that's totally, we're not going to get into it. We're not going to talk about West Memphis 3. We're going to talk about this case, but it
right.
just, I'm always
I can always come back on that. I can always come back for that.
Always.
So we were pretty, we are pretty confident.
Okay.
That it was a male who committed this crime. Just because of the manual dexterity that it would take, plus the fact that females they'll use a knife to protect themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They don't necessarily use knives to attack other people as a percentage. It's overwhelmingly men that do it to others.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
So based on that, and just the fact that some of the knife wounds were really deep, and you have to have really good manual dexterity. And Jeff was so fascinating because, one thing about it, we're pretty confident that the blade didn't break. A lot of people don't realize that when you stab someone, a lot of times the blade will break.
Yes.
And a lot of times the killer will cut themselves.
Yes, I was just going to ask that.
Yeah. But this particular military style dagger, and he actually came and did a podcast with me, Jeff, the knife expert, and I had him in here and we took pictures and he showed us. He had the knife out and he showed us exactly. And I can't think of what that's called, where it has like a safety barrier.
Oh, yes, where it keeps you from it stops your hand from sliding because blood is wet, obviously. And so, yes, but I know what you're talking about, but I don't know the technical term for that. But yeah.
And Jeff's going to kill me when I don't know it, but that's okay. So we
won't tell him.
Yeah, he'll never know.
Well, then we won't tell.
He may be watching right now.
You didn't hear that, Jeff.
But he was very confident, and he showed us like the wound pattern. He was very, very precise in the wound pattern.
Fascinating.
And he showed how it was double edged up to a point, and then he brought an exact replica of that type of a knife. He goes, "This is the knife that was," and the wound patterns were just it was breathtaking. His analysis, and we're like,
wow.
Okay. And several of the people that were questioned in this case had fathers who fought in World War II. So
They had access. Yeah.
There's potential access there. And then come to find out, we had people sending us pictures of knives, like on our Facebook page, of knives all over Lubbock, that they'd go to a garage sale and they'd be like, look at this knife I just found. I wonder if this is it. And so it was really good. I mean, yeah, it was really good. I mean, we really enjoyed it. I mean, we've got people running all over Lubbock, Texas, finding stuff out for us right now.
Wow.
Yeah, this crowdsourcing method has really, really worked well. We did talk to Paul while we were there.
Okay.
He denied remembering the shower story. He actually denied even dating Debbie, which
Vincent's missing here knows what it's called. It's called the fruit guard or a
hilt guard.
Hilt guard.
It's
Sorry.
a hilt guard. Yeah, that's right, Vincent. As soon as I saw that pop in, I'm like,
thank you, Vincent.
Thank you. Yes.
Vincent's missing ear. I sent him the descriptions of the knots for the shoelaces, and he very graciously tied all of them and then showed me with water bottles how they would be if it was, wrist to ankle. I have a much better understanding of those knots now. That'll be another episode. You should come back for that for sure.
I'll come back anytime.
Okay.
Okay.
So
let's see. We tracked down the ex-girlfriend.
Paul
actually went and talked to Doug's best man and his wife. They were married at the time of the murders.
Oh, wow.
And they were still together. They just let me in their house. I sat in there. Jennifer had to leave early that day. And so I just went and interviewed them, sat there for a couple hours, had a really great talk with them. And they tragically had a son who was murdered a few years before that. And it was literally just a crazy deal where he had started dating a woman, and her ex-husband or ex-boyfriend or somebody was in her house, and he came by just to bring her coffee one morning and donuts.
Oh dear.
And the dude just shot him. And so they've dealt with that tragedy. And so anyway, we tracked everybody down. And back to, talking to Paul. Paul denied that he ever dated Debbie, which was ludicrous because he did. I mean, we've got report saying that he did. So I don't know why he would not remember that. And there's some other details. And then eventually, a couple of months after this, he actually called me and talked to me for an hour.
Oh, wow.
And gave us a lot more information.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, and listen, I'm not accusing anybody of anything. This is what I tell people: read the book.
Read the book. Yeah.
You come up with your own conclusions. I'll say this too. We also opened up a dialogue with the Lubbock PD, and we found a DNA lab that was certified to do like touch DNA testing and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
And so we tried to facilitate that. We started a reward fund because there was none. So normally when we start on a case like this, a bare minimum is we'll put at least $5,000 into a reward fund.
Okay.
And we try to, we can bump it up to at least 15 with some donors that we have that if there's some serious traction that starts developing in a case,
right.
We've got some donors. Part of the reason we decided we weren't going to write a book about this case, by the way, we actually did 2 podcasts on it. I do a podcast called Diamond State Murder Board, where I did several episodes, and then American Military University devoted season 2 of their true crime podcast called Break the Case.
Okay.
They did it all. They did was this case, and that's all we planned on doing. Well, CrimeCon approached us again, we approached them. I don't remember how it happened, or Jennifer did, because I obviously didn't. And they had wanted us to do a presentation on Debbie's case, and they actually wanted to profile it in their. They have this thing called the Cold Case Club.
Okay. And
so Jennifer and I hosted a series of and it's kind of like this. It was like all the people in the cold case could get on and and we brought in experts. We brought in a newspaper reporter who covered the Henry Lee Lucas thing at the Lubbock Avalanche Journal. We had Jeff lined up. We had a bunch of other people lined up. We had Francine Bourdal. She runs one of these DNA labs, I think in Florida. But again, like in the Rebecca case, we had a falling out with a family member, and this person was just like, I don't know what it is, but she just couldn't let go of this case. and she didn't like other people studying it, talking about it.
Oh.
She didn't like seeing other people on TV talking about her relative's case. And so we had a falling out, and the falling out was so dramatic that they didn't even CrimeCon, they didn't want to be attached to whatever this was.
Oh, wow.
And so we lost this titanic opportunity. The problem at that point was, though, is that we had already written about 2/3 of this book, because we were like, okay, if we're going to go to CrimeCon, there's a lot of readers there. And we also ran into a unique problem. I will say this. I'm glad we did write the book now, because we encountered so many people in that age range of Debbie and Doug's.
Okay.
They're readers. They're not podcast listeners. They're not watching YouTube. They want to read. And so that's another reason why I wrote the book. And we did something interesting. Every chapter in the book, I wrote one, she wrote one. I wrote one.
Oh, wow.
And we have vastly different writing styles, and we have vastly different life experiences. And her and I are a really good team, because we come at it from such completely different angles. Like, she was in the U.S. military. She worked at the Pentagon. She's worked in the medical examiner's office in the city of New York for years.
Wow.
And so I'm an investigative journalist. I was a true crime author before this. And so we just have vastly different life experiences, and it works really well. And I was a little afraid. I'm not going to lie. So I was like, this is going to be, I told her, I said, this is the most unique true crime. I'm not aware of a true crime book that's written where one person
I'm
writes
not either.
And
I've never heard of that, especially if, it would make sense if she were also a writer, right? If you're collaborating.
She is to a degree. Like, she would write articles for AMU's website, and she's a professor. So, she knows how to write, but she's not like I'm a writer. I write every.
You're a writer. There's a difference.
Yeah.
I can write. If I needed to write something, do I know how to write? Yes. I took classes in high school. I know how to write, but would I sit down and write a book? No way, Jose. It's not my forte at all. I suppose I could. I don't know. I did score pretty good on my TOS test when you have to write the essay at the end. So maybe I could be a writer, but I don't know. Anyway, doesn't, that's neither here nor there.
Yeah. And I also caution people, because, there's this perception that, if you write books that, you're making all this money. And I've interviewed John Grisham before, and I'm pretty sure he makes money.
A little bit.
Yeah. He makes money. Actually a really nice guy. Anyway, so we actually went back to Lubbock a few months after this.
Okay.
Because we wanted to, we brought a dummy with us this time.
Okay.
A dummy that was like to the dimension, it was roughly her height, her weight.
Okay.
And we brought daggers, military style daggers.
I'll be darned.
And we brought a crew with us. We brought some college students. They filmed. They were out there. We had probably 12, 13 people, locals, who were just interested. And then our friend Melissa, she kind of joined our team because of Debbie's case. She got interested in it. She's a social worker who lives in Florida. And she hates to fly. And she asked us, she contacted Jennifer, and she said, if I'll be brave enough to get on a plane, can I join you guys? And so on spring break, that's what we all did. We just went back to Lubbock, Texas, and we got this dummy out in the middle of the day, and we were out there chopping it up with this knife, trying to figure out, okay, what do we think happened, in what order?
Right.
And at one point, this woman named Melissa, I was grabbing her and throwing her up against the wall, and I had the knife like this. And this is a busy intersection.
Oh, God, I can only imagine.
There were cars going by. They would stop, and they would come back. And then there was this one guy out walking a dog. And, his eyes, he looked. I'm like, what are you looking at?
We're just reenacting a crime. Yeah. Calm down.
And
not
so
an actual crime.
I got this huge knife, and right behind me in the garden is Juan. He's getting his garden ready for spring while we're doing all this stuff. Yeah. So that was pretty fun. And you're going to, if you get on our page and you'll read about this, we actually did, Melissa and Jennifer did one night track Paul down again. And
Oh.
so, and it's a pretty dramatic story. So
I'm going to go and look for sure.
yeah, it's pretty dramatic. The reason I'm not telling it is because it's their story.
Yeah, no,
their story to tell.
Yeah.
I had a minor family emergency that night, and they were out, and they just wanted to talk to him, and
wow,
they found him.
Wow.
Yeah,
Interesting. Huh. Interesting. I want to ask you about, you were talking about actually being there at the scene and what a different perspective it is for being there. And it reminded me. So I don't know if you've followed the Pike County massacre case. I mean, it's happened, in 2016 in Ohio. It's a big deal.
Yes.
8 members of the Roden family, right?
Yes.
Okay, so now we've the youngest brother Jake. He's pled guilty. He's got 8 counts of first degree murder, and he's got 8 life sentences without parole. His mother has pled guilty. She's got 30 years. His oldest brother George Wagner the fourth, his trial starts this month, and then his dad is still awaiting trial. Okay, so they've done all of this, and he and his mother both have to testify against George, which is going to be interesting because there is a caveat in Jake's plea deal that he must testify to the satisfaction of the state in order for the death penalty to be removed, which I'm fascinated by that because his testimony, even if he testifies his heart out, right, and he is completely truthful, it really directly contradicts the some of the evidence against his own brother, which is weird to me because George didn't pull the trigger, but he was there. But before the trial has even started, one of the first things after they got the jury members done, right? They've got a jury. They take the jury members out to the crime scenes, which obviously they're not. I mean, they can take them to the properties, but remember they took away the trailers. So, but I thought that was so interesting. That it's not interesting that they took them out there. I think that's an excellent idea because I think that this case is super involved, and it's 4 different crime scenes, and I think the jurors need to be able to see where these places are to understand how much of a well-oiled machine it had to be for them to pull this off. And because nobody woke up. They're all most of them are in their beds, and there's children in the homes, which none of them were hurt. So but I find it interesting that they did this before opening statements or anything. Like the jury has no idea anything, that nothing has been shown to them other than the crime scenes. And I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on that and why they would have done it that way versus waiting for opening statements, at least opening statements and some evidence to be presented.
Well, it's like building a house. It's like you have a footing and a foundation. And I guess my theory that what the prosecutor is trying to do is he or she is trying to create the foundation. So like when they start putting the individual pieces in, when they put the kitchen here and the living room here, and this is the case they're building against them, that you understand the framework under which it fits. And so that would be my guess. And just hearing all that, which I wasn't aware of those details as intimately as you are, it also leads me to believe that a big part of their case against the suspect is this, like you said, like how precise everything had to be for this to come out the way it did.
Yes.
And so precision usually indicates no room for error. And so you go out there, you look at the crime scene, and they're like, this is here, that's there. So when they're presenting in court, the juror's like, okay, I remember that. I remember when he or she told me that. So it makes
That's
sense.
interesting. So I didn't think about it that way, because when I was watching, Max wants to know what the name of your Facebook pages are so she can go look at them.
Okay, it's the Unsolved Murder of Deborah Sue Williamson and the Unsolved Murder of Rebecca Gould. And
Okay.
join both of them. I post stuff in there. Jennifer posts all the time, and we have discussions. Like we'll bring on an expert. We'll do a Zoom. Like Jennifer will call me and say, "You want to do a Zoom? Like like in a couple days, and we'll just sit down and we'll bring in somebody." And when you're in this line of work, like I've been a journalist for a long time, I know a lot of experts. If they have
Right,
time,
right.
like right now, I've got a buddy of mine. He's an arson expert. We're going to bring him in to look at some stuff in another case out of West Virginia here pretty soon.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, yeah. So I mean, it's like on the Netflix series, the Ted Bundy tapes.
Mm-hmm.
Richard Suver, I've interviewed him, several times. Which of course, the bite mark science is,
Yes.
going down the drain right now. But
Yeah.
but like Dr. Michael Bodden, I've interviewed him before. Dr. Janice Ophoven, Dr.
Oh,
Werner
wow.
Schwartz.
You know who I want to talk to?
Who?
Dr. Henry Lee.
I talked to him.
Well, can you get him to talk to me, George? Because let me tell you something. I'll never forget it, because I was 18, just turned 18 when OJ, the trial started, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember watching it, and I remember I had the biggest crush on Dr. Lee, because he was just the way he would explain it. And I don't know, it was just fascinating to me. Like, how he would explain the blood spatter and why it had to come from this elevation versus that, and the direction. And it just fascinated me. And I have still to this day have the biggest crush on Dr. Lee. That's who I want to talk to.
Well, Jen, I can tell you this, and I've had the privilege of being around a lot of, like, I'll say celebrities, famous people, politicians, athletes, stuff like that. And sometimes, there's that old saying, you don't ever want to meet your hero because they may not be your hero after you meet them.
Right.
But I will say this about Dr. Lee. I met him in May of this year. It's the first time I've ever actually met him. And he was a genuinely decent, good guy.
Really?
I really enjoyed chatting with him.
Yeah, that makes me happy, because I thought you were about to just let me down and I was going to be so sad. No, I'm glad to hear that he's a good.
Hey, I could tell. I've met some, and I hate to say
I'm
it,
sure.
but one of my favorite actors of all time is William Shatner, and I've been around him twice, and I've interviewed him, and
not a nice guy, huh?
Just not. I mean, he's not what I thought.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like, but I still enjoy his acting, and he was gracious with his time. So I mean,
yeah,
I'm happy with that, but he's I'll tell you who was really, really nice that I interviewed not too long ago.
Who?
Barbara Eden.
Jeannie?
Yep.
I bet she is nice.
One of the nicest ladies I have ever interviewed. In fact, she was trying to call me to set up the interview one day. And I kept not answering it because I didn't know who it was. And she left me like 4 voicemails. And
I would keep them too.
Yeah.
I would keep them too.
Yeah. So she, super nice. Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam.
I heard he is an incredibly nice guy and very just like super low key, down to earth, humble kind of guy too.
Yes, he is. Yeah,
I wouldn't mind meeting old Eddie Vedder.
No, and he can really sing too.
Yeah, he can. I'm so fascinated by how how the state of Ohio is gonna put this case together with the because he didn't, like I said, he didn't actually pull the trigger, but he was there at all 4 scenes. And you know how you're an accessory, blah blah blah. So, and then there's this. I know you and I talked a little bit. There's the Kylie. I don't know how to say her last name right. Rodney, Kylie Rodney. It's going on right now. It's all over YouTube and stuff like that. And I just I keep thinking that I would like to have somebody who is really proficient study or explain to people why her vehicle was found upside down, and is it possible that in the See, my theory was this. My theory is that it was an accident, right? Because I don't have anything else to go off of. There's no autopsy yet, right? So my theory is that it was an accident and that she undid her seatbelt to get to the back seat so that she could get out that window that was already halfway down, and the water came in too fast and it was just an accident. And then when the vehicle flipped, because it filled up with water, the tires are buoyant, the engine is heavy, physics and all that, that
Yeah.
she then went to the back. She sort of, because that's where they found her. She's in a CRV, and she, how they have the hatchback.
Oh yeah, no, I
Yeah.
mean she was fleeing to the best pot. I mean, like the most probable place for her to survive. I mean,
Right.
that's just human instinct. You're going to do that every time.
Right. And I think that she just unfortunately didn't make it. And then in the course of the vehicle flipping upside down is when her body was then moved to the back. But I mean, I'm not going to, I mean, there are some, there's more than some. There's a few like head scratcher parts to this case. But then again, I also have to remember the age of the victim and who was around, which is similar kids of that age and that age group. And so their stories aren't always, I mean, it's a bunch of teenagers. And I know law enforcement has said it many, many times that their most difficult cases to solve are those of teenagers because their peer group is so huge. They have people that they're close to. There's like many layers to their circles of friends, and it's difficult. And so I think that's kind of what's going on here. I remember when Adrian Jones was murdered, and she went to Mansfield High, which is right by Arlington.
Mm-hmm.
And they were interviewing, they just started bringing in the kids from her school from, one by one. And they would later on go on to say that it was difficult because, again, there is so many layers to a teenager's friend group. They have their inner circle of people that they're actually friends with, and especially teenage girls. Then you have the girls that they're your B friends, like you're cool to hang out with them, but like on a limited basis. And then there's the C group, and then there's the D group, which is the last resort, so it's hard. I'm just curious how all of this is going to play out with Kylie, because I feel like what I'm seeing trending right now on YouTube is that it almost doesn't matter what the official report is. People are just convinced that that something bigger has happened, and I don't know. I'll just have to see how it plays out.
Jen, I tell people this all the time. I speak at a lot of colleges and universities. I speak to a lot of criminology like students.
Mm-hmm.
There's just kind of a rule of thumb that you always have to follow. It's not always right, but you have to always start with this. The shortest distance between the evidence you got and what happened,
Mm-hmm.
that's usually the correct route. And what I mean by that is that usually if a woman is killed and she's married, it's either her husband or another lover.
Right.
You go with the statistical probability. Now, that Rebecca Gould case, if William Miller's confession is true and
Mm-hmm.
genuine, he didn't know her, he didn't live in the state, it's out in the middle of nowhere with not next to a major highway of any kind. He has a connection in the sense that his cousin was dating her.
Right.
Which is weird. And if he didn't sexually assault her or intend to sexually assault her, that case isn't even statistically probable. I told Jennifer, I said, what would happen if we had a computer that all it did was analyze this stuff? We would put all these data points in there, a program, and it would come back and say, yeah, right.
It's a statistical anomaly because it's a loose connection, right? And he said, but I think that there's probably more to the story than what he's telling, obviously.
Oh yeah, there is.
I find it highly doubtful that he just happened to be passing by and needed to use the phone. You know what I'm saying?
Well, he said he hid his truck out in a pasture out away from the road, and that he was hunting, and he just happened to notice her car, which she drove like a Chevy Cavalier, and it was just out front by itself. And so he knew he didn't say it, but he knew that if her car was there, he knew Casey was at work.
Right.
And he even said when he was confessing, he said, if Casey had been there, she'd have survived. This wouldn't have happened.
I think he had different intentions. I don't think this was happenstance or an accident. It's very, even like, even serial killers stalk their prey. You know, like when you, I find. Tell me.
I didn't tell you this. So
tell me.
When he's confessing, he says, when this urge comes over me, I can't control it. And here's the thing. We got a bunch of messages from people who have been around him through the years, women who are related to people who are related to him.
Right.
Like their wives. He would try to have sex with those women.
Lord.
Like his own relatives' wives and girlfriends and stuff like that.
Just
like he
no
would
shame.
He would force himself on them.
Wow.
And he lived overseas. And
yeah,
Jennifer, my partner there, she's been all over the world, and she's like, you realize how easy it would be to just, rape and kill somebody in another country. I mean, he did it in this country and got away with it for 16 years. This one. Oh, and you know what his passcode on his phone was?
What?
0204. So you switch one number and it's 2004, and that's when he killed her.
Oh my gosh. See, and that's the thing I find fascinating, because there are some things about human behavior that, although we're all individuals, right? But there are some things about us. We are creatures of habit, unfortunately. And we do things that's why the knots have puzzled me on the boys, because it is okay. If you take the knots at face value, yes, technically there are 3 different knots. Okay. But on one side of Michael Moore's body is one type of knot. On the left side is one type. On the right side is a different type. And it's the same with Steve Branch. The only person who had all of the knots consistent was Christopher Byers. But to me, and Vincent's missing ear was explaining this to me, that knots are a habit. There's something like you learn them and then you know their uses and whatnot. But to me, I still, even after like he took the time, he did an excellent job. He did such I have to put it all together so I can present it to everybody. But even when I look at that, to me, I still say that it was intentionally tied differently to make it appear as if it were something that other than what it was. Like it was intended to make it appear as if there were multiple perpetrators involved rather than maybe just 1 or 2. I think it was a countermeasure, because it makes no sense for because the argument obviously is that, Jason tied up Steve Branch or Christopher Byers, Damien tied up Steve Branch, and Jesse would have tied up Michael Moore, but not. They tied one side, like Jason tied the right side of Stevie, and Michael and Damien tied the left side. You know what I'm saying? That makes no sense. Why would you do that?
Yeah, that's ridiculous. I mean, come on.
Yeah, it makes no sense. But human beings really are creatures of habit, and they do things.
Well, here's the thing I'll say though.
Subconsciously.
Human beings are creatures of habit, but you got to remember there's other factors too. Some people are trained in tying knots.
Right.
If you're a Boy Scout, you're trained to tie a bunch of different kinds of knots. So you have that cardinal knowledge inside you.
Right.
You also got to take into account of when the person's tying those knots, is the person they're tying the knot when they're binding them, are they moving?
Right, which they weren't.
Which could affect how you tie the knot. Because
that's an excellent point.
Yeah, because I think people have this notion, like when they're talking about tying these knots, that okay, I'm putting my shoes on. This is our in our mind. This is how we tie knots. It's when you put your shoes on. Guess what's not moving when you put your shoes on?
Your feet are not moving.
Your feet are not moving, and it's not an awkward tie because you've done it since you were a little kid.
That's true. So and even when you tie your kids' shoes, their feet aren't moving either. Some,
Right.
for the most part. I mean, when they're little,
Yeah.
they kind of give you a hard time, but you can
I
still.
I would actually challenge somebody on that front. And I'm glad you brought that up. So you tie your own shoe, like you tie your own knot on your own shoelace, right?
Right.
And you could take pictures of it, or you could categorize it some way so that people could see it.
Right.
Now go tie someone else's shoes on their feet.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a good thing to test out.
Yeah, test it out because I've never done it, but I
But
guarantee you that the knot's probably going to be a little bit different
it will be because
when
you're
you're
doing it
tying
from a
together.
different direction too.
Yes.
That's an excellent point. And the thing about Creature of Habit, I was really referring to the phone, that his password on his phone, that
Yeah.
he subconsciously switched around the numbers, but all of the numbers are there that make 2004, because obviously that's an important number for him,
It's
something
the
he
seminal to
remembers.
me. It was when I heard it, it was the seminal moment for him.
Yeah.
I think he's killed more people.
I would not be surprised. It's
Yeah.
very, see, I think I think most people are under the perception that that people who kill are similar, but that's not the case. There is a
Mhm.
difference in killing somebody that is unknown to you, and then also somebody that is known to you. It's a different type. It's a different breed of people that do that. And
Yes.
the person I find, of all of the serial killers that have ever been interviewed, I think Ed Kemper is probably the most honest about the things that he thought, the way that he was feeling. Obviously, everybody, it's just human nature to hold some stuff back and keep some details for yourself. But I think on the whole, he was the most in tune with his own mind. And why? Probably because he spent all those years in the mental institution when he killed his grandparents. But
Mm-hmm.
he was the most in tune with his self.
He's a good one.
He is.
I think that Bundy though, when he finally started telling quote unquote the truth,
Mm-hmm.
he really, I mean, people don't understand, like, those they played out in the Ted Bundy tapes pretty well. And, but I mean, he really unloaded at the end.
He did, but there's the one murder that he won't talk about, and that's the little girl, his neighbor.
Oh,
And
that's true.
I always found that fascinating. But the other thing is about Bundy is that there's some elements that he would never admit to, which was the necrophilia. But Kemper,
I thought no, he did. He did admit to the necrophilia before he was executed. Yeah, he
eventually,
did.
but
Yeah.
yes, but it was very difficult. He didn't want to talk about it. Took him a long time to get it out of him. Whereas Ed Kemper, what he
Oh,
did with his mother's head
yeah.
is so
Yeah.
foul, but he is so open and honest about it, and why he did it. Exactly that's why he fascinates me, because because he's so willing to say what he was going through in his brain, whereas Bundy is more like he'll tell you what he did but not the why. But
Yeah.
Kemper gives you the why, his
Well,
reasoning.
I'll tell you what was interesting. Just bringing up Bundy in that the Ted Bundy tapes. That journalist. What is his name?
Oh gosh, don't get
You
me
know who I'm
going.
talking about. It's
Yes.
one of the two guys. It was the guy, not the main guy in the Ted Bundy tapes, but he was also the main journalist with Henry Lee Lucas. He went from Bundy for 2 years,
Yes.
and then he went to Henry Lee Lucas, and so he was one of the ones that proved that Henry was lying, And so it's interesting that
Yes.
there's that connection.
Isn't it though? And the other thing that I thought was interesting is the way that they treated Henry Lee Lucas versus the way they treated Ted Bundy when he was Henry was treated like almost like a celebrity. I mean, he had that
Yeah.
whole film crew from Japan coming out there
Yeah.
and interviewing him and all that. And I also thought it was just so, I think that they were so eager to close some of these cases that they listened, and they shouldn't have. And in the process of wanting to bring closure to families, they actually unintentionally, I think, hurt families, and I think
Oh,
that's
no,
unfortunate.
no, that's not even a question. Can you imagine you go through the tragedy of losing someone horrifically, that, like in Debbie's case, stabbed to death, pants pulled down, shirt pulled up, as inhumane as it gets, stabbed that poor, beautiful young person to death.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and here's the thing. When her parents showed up that night, Bob and Joyce, when they showed up, Bob ran. Bob was legally blind, her stepdad.
Oh, bless his heart.
And he was legally blind, but he could still see things, and he couldn't drive.
Right.
And so he actually jumped out of the moving car when Doug called him and said, she's dead. They got in their car, they drove there. Bob jumped out of the car. There were two police officers at the front of the carport.
Okay.
He absolutely obliterated both of them. It's in the police reports.
Wow.
He knocked them two guys to the ground. He just annihilated them.
To get to his daughter.
He ran past them to get to her. And, and yeah, I think it'd be fair to say that it wasn't actually his daughter, because it was a stepdaughter, but he loved her.
Yeah, it was his daughter.
Yeah, he loved her. And her own, and her natural father loved her too. I mean,
right.
We have letters that the two of them exchanged around the time of her wedding. And she was talking back and forth with her biological father as well. And so, and that was the thing about Debbie. She was a very like everybody just liked her.
Yeah.
And we have the letters. It's so weird. You get a sense of who a person is, but going back to her stepdad, he said forevermore, the worst mistake he ever made in his life was knocking those two cops down. And because they told him, you don't want to see this. You don't want to see this. And he did it. And he said, I can never unsee what I saw.
Yeah, you can't. Isn't it interesting though, how the dichotomy with Debbie's mother, who was so sure that the person that the cops were trying to say had committed this crime, she was so sure that he didn't, and fought to prove that he didn't do it. Whereas with the West Memphis 3, Mark Byers, I think was really the first. And I find it interesting that it was him, because he was so staunchly convinced and so public about it. It's not like Pam and Terry and Todd and Dana weren't convinced that the West Memphis 3 were guilty. It's just that, they sort of, Mark was the one that was loud and proud in front of the cameras, talking about it all the time, but he's the one that ended up being convinced. And I just find that so, well, I can't imagine how that must feel.
I'll say this. And of course I interviewed John Mark Byers a bunch and Pam a bunch. I think actually they might've came to the epiphany around the same time, but like you said, John Mark Byers was just more vocal about it.
Mm-hmm.
But Pam was pretty vocal. I mean, I was working at the newspaper there in Jonesboro when all this stuff started happening in the mid 2000s. And I had no problem getting a hold of her, and she would just tell me exactly what she thought about what was going on. And it was,
Yeah. I just can't imagine going along and thinking, first of all, what happened, that losing a child losing a family member, period, is awful, especially to murder, but losing your child to murder is something, it goes against nature, the natural order of things.
Yeah.
Parents don't bury their children bury their parents, so to have that happen, and then
Jen, and especially the age, I think that also has a factor too, because there's like a golden window of time when it comes to having a child.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it starts around the age of about 3 and it runs to about the age of 11.
Yes.
And what I mean by that golden age is like before the age of 3, your child is so dependent on you that it's very stressful for most parents.
They're a lot of work.
Right. But then by the time they get to be about 3, they're not as much work. They can kind of not babysit themselves, but they can kind of take care of themselves. They can go in their own room and play with their toys, and you don't have to worry about them, killing themselves or killing their siblings. Hopefully. But like, so from 3 to 11, they're just kind of like, it's like the golden time with the child because there's an infinite possibility of what they'll become.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there's no, they don't talk back nearly as much as they do.
No, they don't.
There's no crying anymore. Like, you don't have to change a diaper. You don't have to bail them out of jail. You don't have to listen to them lie about why they did something on a test.
Right.
So there's like this golden window, and those three boys were
right
taken
there.
in the middle of that window.
Yeah.
Because I think any parent would agree, if you lost your kid at 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, it would be much harder than if you lost them at 30 or if you
True.
lost them before they were born or at
That's
6
true.
months. Because
That's a
you
good
don't.
point.
So I've actually thought about that a lot.
That's a good point. I didn't actually think about it that way, but you know what? You're absolutely right. There is that golden window where it's easy, as easy as parenting can be right then, because
Mhm.
then they become teenagers and you go from being the smartest, like my kids, when they were in between those ages, I was the smartest woman in the room all the time.
Yeah.
Then overnight, I was the dumbest woman in the room always, no matter who was in the room all the time. And
Yeah.
they would ask me, she's driving me nuts, used to ask me a question, wait for me to answer, and then argue with the answer. And I'd be like, why'd you ask me then? But they used to do it. And I would fall for it every dadgum time. So maybe I was the dumbest person in the room at that time. But yeah, you're right. It is
Wait
such
a minute,
a.
you just said dadgum, so your Southern card, you just flashed it on the screen there. Congrats. Dadgum.
I can't help it. I mean, it's just you say what you hear, and dadgum is a word I heard.
I don't know. I've heard it probably a trillion times. So
I use it all the time, and I'm not even like a super religious person. That's why people use it, because they don't want to say the other word. But
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about that.
yeah,
Right.
but I can't imagine what it would be to think that first of all, to have that happen, and then to be told everything you thought you knew is wrong. Didn't happen. What a mind
Jen, that is the
blown that would
thing
be.
when it comes to those parents, the ones that change their mind in that case.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people understand the hurdle that they had to overcome. Even John Mark Byers, because everybody said he was just a stepdad, which there's been speculation that he wasn't Christopher's stepdad, and that maybe Melissa was messing around with him, and that Christopher was the product of that.
Oh.
Yeah, because they look so much alike. Now, I don't get into all that stuff.
See, to me, Chris looks exactly like Melissa.
If you look at his bone structure, I mean, when somebody brought it up to me one time, I was
I
like,
have to look a little closer.
Look at his face. Look at John Mark Byers' face. Just imagine if he put a full head of hair on him with blonde hair and just kind of look at him and you'd be like, man. But you can't go by that because it looks. But like the hurdle that you have to get over to think, you've been told this. They come to your house. They grab your hands. They say, listen, this horrible thing that happened to your son. It was a terrible thing. He endured so much pain, but we got him. They did it. They confessed to it. The evidence points at them. There's no doubt in the world. We're 100% convinced. Don't ever let anybody tell you that this isn't true. Don't let the media come in. They're liars and whatever. And they tell you that. They go through it. And to think that like Pam Hobbs especially, because there's no doubt that Stevie's her son.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, she bared that kid.
And you can tell that they had a special bond, Stevie and Pam did. You can tell that.
In the book that I wrote about it, she told me, I said, so what's the last thing you ever did for your son? Like the last thing, what was the last thing you ever did for him? She said, when he was laying in his coffin, he needed somebody to put his socks on his feet.
Oh, bless her heart.
And so she said, the last thing I did is I put his socks on his feet.
Aw.
Yeah.
That breaks my heart. I mean, the last thing, okay, so I've been very fortunate. And the last thing that the person that has passed away that was closest to me was my mom. And the last thing that I did for my mom was her makeup. And I was absolutely, the funeral director was like, you sure you want to do this? And I was like, yeah, because my mom always complimented me on how well I did my makeup, and she'd always want me to do hers. And it was the last thing that I could do for my mom. And then like for my sister, the last thing that she did for my mom was pick out the outfit. The last thing her husband, my brother-in-law, did, he's military, and I've never seen anybody be able to iron as well as my brother-in-law, and he ironed her outfit.
There's no question about that.
Yeah, well,
those guys know how to do that.
Yeah. So I mean, it was, that's what he did, and it's weird, the things that suddenly you remember, when something like that happens. And it's sad. And every day now we're hearing about like the craziness of what's happening. Like, look at Memphis. So
you want to hear something crazy? So
yes,
the teacher that got murdered, Eliza.
Yes.
I know people who are friends with her.
Of course you do, George. Who don't you know? You're like the Kevin Bacon of the journalism world.
I think I am.
You might be 6 degrees of George Jared.
Listen, if you don't believe this, I'll show you the Instagram message. I had a friend who works out at my gym, and she messaged me and she goes, "I need you to do me a favor." And I said, "Hey, what's going on?" She goes, "Well, you know that woman that's missing in Memphis?" And this was like early, this was like within a few hours, like it was just starting to get out into the media. And I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "Well, she's a friend of mine." I said, "Are you serious?" And she goes, "Yeah." And she goes, "I know her really well." And she goes, "Could you just get on your like social media, like true crime stuff, and just have people like just spread the word?" And I said, "Yeah, I can do that." And then as soon as I did that, I had another friend of mine message me, and she's like, "Oh, you do know I know her, right?" And I was like, "No, I didn't know that."
Well, I know now.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what's funny, not funny, just ironic.
Right.
You remember the Sydney Sutherland case from a couple of years ago?
Vaguely.
Where that Quake Llewellyn guy, like she was out jogging and he hit her with
yes.
I can't make this up.
Okay.
He worked out at my gym.
Oh my gosh.
He was, and it's even crazier than that.
Oh God, I can't even imagine.
I was standing at the front desk talking to a guy that I'm real good friends with. He was a friend of mine who was a really good college basketball player. He worked up there for a while. And him and I were just sitting there chatting, and there was a girl up there who, she was a college student at the time. She's not anymore. Really nice girl. I've known her for years. And the three of us were talking. He comes in to sign up 2 months before he killed Sydney.
Shut up.
No, I cannot make that up. And I knew several people who worked with her, like who knew her personally.
Are you hearing anything about, I cannot remember her name, the other girl that went missing at approximately around the same day, not like the same date?
No, it wasn't the same date, but it was under. Okay, what happened was he was a farmhand who worked on some farms, and as the crow flies from where this happened to Sydney, there was another woman who vanished. They found her car. They've never found her, and the White River is pretty close to there. They've always suspected foul play. It was within about a year and a half.
No, I'm talking about the one that's recent. The one, the girl that's pregnant and 22 that disappeared around the same time as.
Yeah.
Actually,
I had somebody contact me about that, and I've read about a little bit about it, but I don't know a bunch about it.
Okay. Because I'm worried about that one. She's 22 years old. She got in a fight with her aunt. She walked out the door and was never heard from again.
Yeah.
And and she's pregnant. And I'm worried about her too. And then there's there's a ton of people that are going missing. Like I will get up in the morning.
I wrote about a case one time, and this is no joke. A girl got in a fight with her aunt. She was 22. Her name was Bridget Sellers. She decides to go for a walk on Peace Valley Road, of all the names of all the roads that she could walk. And she vanishes. She has a couple of kids. She vanishes. They don't find her for years. And I remember seeing a missing poster, and I started writing about it. And this was years ago. And I saw a missing poster, and I was like, man, whatever happened to this? And I went to the editor of the newspaper I was working at the time. I said, this is going to sound like a crazy question. I said, do you remember a 22-year-old woman who was missing and they never found her? And he goes, I don't know what you're talking about. So to make a long story short, what happened is where she went missing was in between two counties, this Peace Valley.
Okay.
And so they didn't really know what the jurisdiction was because the family was really going nuts over this. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and tell you the story. I shouldn't.
Just tell me. Just tell me. I want to hear it.
Okay, so I'm trying to find. I figured out that there was an aunt who had reported her missing.
Okay.
And so I'm trying to find this aunt. I knew her name was Vicky.
Okay.
And Vicky Jones. And so I'm looking for this woman. I can't find her anywhere. Well, my sister comes into town, and my sister's from Dallas, and she wanted to hang out with my kids, and so she went to, I think it was Walmart, to buy a sprinkler. And so she shows up with a sprinkler, and it really sucked. I'm like, ugh, this is horrible. And so my sister's like, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, I guess we could go to the lake and just go over there and do something. She said, okay. So to get to the lake from where I lived at that time, you had to drive down Peace Valley Road.
Oh, geez.
So we're driving along Peace Valley Road. It's about a 10-mile road. It's out in the middle of nowhere. And she's talking. And I'm just like, God dang, would you just shut up? I mean,
right.
She's telling me all these stupid stories. Well, then she starts telling me a story about how she was standing in line at Walmart. And she was talking to a lady about some St. Bernard's puppies, because my sister is big into, like, she's a big advocate for dogs. Like she fosters dogs and does all this other stuff. Well, she had a friend who wanted a St. Bernard's puppy.
Mm-hmm.
And so she pulls out this woman's card and she goes, yeah, this woman said she's got a couple of puppies. I may go look at them. And she goes, and I think she lives on Peace Valley Road where we're on right now. And I said, really? And I looked over at the card. I just glanced at it as I'm driving.
If you tell me it's Vicky Jones, I'm going to be done.
Vicky Jones and her cell phone number written on the back of this card.
Shut up.
I hit the brakes. My kids, sister, everybody's like, what is going on? I go, I have been looking for this woman for a year and a half. I call her. We're stopped in the middle of the road. I get out my cell phone. I call her. I said, are you Bridget Sellers' aunt?
George, I think you live some kind of a charmed life, the situations are so crazy that you just random moments. Life is funny that way, though. Golly.
Yeah. Oh, and I'll tell you what's even crazier. So I go and interview the aunt. I said, listen, I'm coming to see you tomorrow. I said, I can't right now. I said, I'm coming tomorrow. I show up there. She's a dog breeder. I go in the house. I see Bridget Sellers' little son. He's like 2.
Aww.
He's staying with her. She's taking care of him. So I take a picture of the son swinging on a swing.
Uh-huh.
As the crow flies about 500 yards away, there's a little tiny dirt mound. And it looks like an ant mound. If you see the picture, it looks like an ant mound. It doesn't look like anything. It's across the field. This is out rural pasture land. There's cows everywhere. There's hay.
Right.
But you can definitely see this little tiny bit of dirt. His mother was chopped up and floating in a septic tank.
Shut up.
Right next to that dirt.
Who did it? Was it Vicky?
No.
Who did it?
So what happened was, and I actually found this out. I actually was the one that went to the courthouse and found these documents. So she was staying with her Aunt Vicky, and they were fighting because she had a kind of a loose lifestyle. She liked to party. She was young, and she had kids. And
right.
And her Aunt Vicky's like, you got to stop doing this. That's what got them into the big fight.
Okay.
So she leaves the house and goes for a walk that day on Peace Valley Road. An uncle on her other side of her family, not related to Vicky, sees her walking down the road and picks her up.
Oh, dear.
He had been charged with molesting her when she was a kid.
Oh, my God.
He pulls out a gun. He takes her back to his house. He lives on the same road.
Okay.
Which is really weird because neither Vicky or him, a guy named Jerry, they were not from that area, but they both happened to just move into this same neighborhood, even though they weren't related, but they had this one niece that they were both related to, if that makes sense.
No, I get it. Yeah.
Okay. So something happens and he kills her. Who knows what he did with her before that? And then he chops her up and he stuffs her into a septic tank.
Oh my God.
The police get a tip. I get a call from a detective. He's like, dude, he goes, hey, just heads up, we're going to be searching the property tomorrow, and we think she's there somewhere. And I was like, okay. And I had already found the child molestation where he molested her. I'd already found the affidavit at the
Right.
courthouse. I found it in
Okay.
an old dusty box. Nobody even knew. It wasn't in a computer system anywhere. No one even knew. And I'd taken it to the police. I'm like, hey, you might want to check into this. And they're like,
Yeah, here's a red flag.
yeah. So yeah. So they go out and search his property. They don't find anything. Apparently, what he did, why there was a little dirt mound there, is the front gate on a septic tank?
Yeah.
He pulled up that gate after they left, and he fished out all of her big bones, like her skull and her torso.
Oh my. Ugh.
So they get another tip that, hey, she's in the septic tank. So they go and drain the septic tank. And when they do, they only find the small little bones. They don't find any big bones. And they identified her because she had a rare genetic condition in her hands.
Uh-huh.
It was like a bone deformity. And she also still had her rings on her fingers that spelled out like BRID, I think. Like,
oh my gosh.
yeah.
That's crazy.
And
It's
then, oh no, the final salvo.
Okay.
He dies from cancer the day they're going to charge him with capital murder.
Shut up.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's like Chandler Halderson. Did you ever see anything about his case? Fascinating to me because
well, that sounds really familiar.
It just happened. His trial was just this year, and he's out of Wisconsin. And what he did was he had created this elaborate lie saying that he worked at SpaceX. And he's
oh,
be,
yeah.
But this is what got me. So he burned their bodies. Well, not both of them, his mother and some of his father in the family's fireplace. And what was fascinating to me is he was able to, like, there were only bone fragments. Now, I don't know how they didn't ever find all of his mom because they found like a leg and a foot and then his dad's like torso. But the rest, you know what I'm saying? And I just found the fact that he was able to whatever bones he had, whatever he placed, which they think were their heads, in the fireplace, he was able to burn them down to nothing but bone fragments because they had to be sifted out.
It's simply impossible. What he did is he either A, burned all that stuff someplace else and then placed some there, or B, he fished out again some of the bigger bones and just hid them somewhere because it's impossible. I mean,
yeah, that's what blew me away is that
you'd burn a fireplace. You would literally burn your house to the ground.
Well, see, that's what's weird about it. So this was over the 4th of July weekend. And the neighbors recall the fireplace running the entire time. And they used the neighbors' surveillance from across the street. Their cameras were one of them caught the Halderson home. And you can see the fire burning in the fireplace. And what's even weird, what's even crazier about it is that it burned so hot that he ended up breaking the doors. They exploded and he cut himself on his toe. Not bad. It wasn't a bad cut, but it just, the lengths that people will go to. All he had to do was get a job. I don't even think his parents, if he had just told his parents, look, I lied about working at SpaceX. I don't have a job offer at SpaceX, but I got an interview and I'm going to be employed here at something lesser than SpaceX. They just wanted him to work. You know what I mean? Right. So I feel like and then he ended up depositing body parts on his girlfriend's mother's partner, her family farm, the farm that had been in her family her whole life. Right. And they're both like, Chandler, I call him by his Instagram name, which is Chazzle Dazzle.
Yeah,
You
I
can't.
remember
I mean,
that too.
yeah. When she was on the stand, the girlfriend. What's his Snapchat handle? Chazzle Dazzle. I was like, oh my god. From now on, you're Chazzle Dazzle. But yeah, um, he ruined that farm for his girlfriend's partner and mother. So it's crazy the lengths that people will go to.
Yeah, necessity is the mother of all invention.
You
So
are right. You are right. Okay, well, listen, hang out for just a second. I'm going to end the broadcast, but I still want to chat a little bit with you if you're up for it, because they've been going for like 2 hours. So I want to thank George for being here tonight. Thank you so much. Your stories are the best. You have to come back and tell more. You have
I've
the
got
best stories.
I've got some more. So if you ever need one,
I need all of them. I need to hear all of their stories because they're good.
I
Thank you
can
for
sit.
being here tonight. Thank you guys all for coming. And I will see you all next time. I'm still working on West Memphis 3 and some other stuff too for you guys. So just stay tuned. I'll have more content. All right. Good night, everybody. Bye. Oh crap. I didn't. There we go.